Hello, good evening, and welcome to the last session for this night, the first night of the exciting Biennial. And this session is called The Ethical Ambiguities of Collaborating Online. And I would like to pass on to Leo Mindel, because he will be our host today, and he will lead the discussion about it.
Good evening. Thank you, Igor. We're waiting for one more, Simon, but I think he's going to appear. But that's fine. We'll be fine. We're fine. It's a really interesting subject. What do we do online? Some of us, as we can see by Gabriel, I think have spent their life online. Or he's never spent his life out of where he is at the moment. Where are you actually, Gabriel?
Well, I saw this billed as a fireside chat in some of the publicity, so I thought I ought to oblige.
You're a bit quiet, Gabriel, but go on. Yep. Your fireside chat, yeah?
Having a fireside chat, I didn't want you to see the splendour in which rabbinic students get to live.
Yeah.
But it's also really interesting. Now we're all living our lives online.
Yeah. You're right. Can you give, for those that don't know who you are, and what you do on the interwebs, can you just give a quick background?
So I'm student Rabbi Gabriel Cantor. I have looked after a number of liberal Judaism communities during my time as a rabbinic student, and long before that, and no doubt long after that, I've been very active on Facebook and Twitter, doing everything from building connections to blogging to commenting on politics, occasionally appearing in Private Eye. There's a lot going on in the world.
And moving on quickly, and I'll come back to myself, but Rebecca.
Hi, Leo. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Sigerman Knight, and I'm representing Kingston Liberal Synagogue tonight. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Cool. I'm their press and publicity officer, which I do in a voluntary capacity. So I run their Twitter and their Facebook and their Instagram accounts. I wasn't allowed to set up a TikTok account, but I'll work on that a little bit more. In my professional life, I have been for the last 7 years, a private piano teacher. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years working as a finance director for a global multinational. And then I realized that was a ridiculous way to be earning a living. So I gave it all up in a fit of a midlife crisis to set up a private piano studio. And I've never looked back. I now live with 2 cats and I have a beautiful garden and spend my time between the piano and social media.
Between the piano and social media. I'm sure that's a line from somewhere. I'm sure that is.
It's from me. I just said it.
Moving on to Igor.
Hi, my name is Igor Zinkov. I serve the Liberal Jewish Synagogue as a rabbi, and it just happened that when I was a student in my final year of Leobeck College, I wrote my MA thesis, or my rabbinic dissertation, on the topic of ethics. Jewish ethics of communication applied on social media, and I took some of the ethical difficulties of which rabbis of Talmud had in their lifetime, and tried to apply them in the new reality of the social media. And so perhaps I will try to bring their voices today to our conversation.
So is that you're able to do the Talmud in 160 characters?
Talmud in 160 characters. Well, actually, my experiment, which I've been doing for quite a while now, is to write a sermon in 160 characters, which I think quite a few congregants would really appreciate.
I think that falls in the as long as it starts well, ends well, and there's not a lot between it. Is yes. That's it. That's exactly the type of sermon we all like. So coming around to myself, my name's Leo. Before all of this strange world changed about. I run a digital sports agency that helps governing bodies and federations online. During this period, I've been assisting a number of synagogues and also LJ in bringing things together. And this last 3 weeks has been just this and all the panic and stress that goes with this. So that's what I've been doing. So obviously, taking somebody like Gabriel, who has had no run-ins with anybody online, Gabriel, what do you see as the positives and the negatives of contributing online?
I think the positives are by far the most important, and it's just a way to connect with people and reach people that we would otherwise not be doing that, and also to be seen doing things that it's important for us, particularly as progressive Jews, to be seen doing. I think so many online interactions are not actually about direct person-to-person communication, but about the audience who see those interactions and who are able to think, this is what our Jewish institutions are doing, this is what our Jewish institutions are saying, this is where the conversation is in the Jewish community. And those lead to the personal interactions. I am constantly going to new communities and meeting people who say, oh, are you the Gabriel of the internet? And several times out of 10, that is a positive. And that's someone who's encountered progressive Judaism in an online format and was maybe inspired to go to their local synagogue to try it out, whatever it would be. There are definitely also negatives as well. There's a lot of horrible people online, and I think maybe it's easier to be horrible or to allow yourself to be led into being horrible in a slightly more anonymous format where you can't see people's faces. I also wonder actually how that will change after this current crisis, when we're getting so much more used to communicating online, but when you can see the faces and when you do know the people. And I think that the nature of connection building is changing very rapidly. Messages are getting longer. We're beginning to do long video things rather than just 160 characters. Igor, I think the window for your 160 character sermon being in vogue might have passed, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing that we can go at more length. And maybe later on, as well as we progress into the fireside chat, I have a story about one of the negatives of social media turning into a very personal positive.
So, Rebecca, I know that, you literally did a Reggie Perinaud, is that right, if I remember rightly? Threw everything away and walked into the sea, but this time you walked into social media. Have you seen positives and negatives of collaborating online? We'll start with the negatives or the positives. Where would you see that?
So I guess I have two hats, because I run the KLS social media accounts, and I would say that's entirely positive, actually. When I took it over, it didn't have very many followers, and I've sort of made it more active. And we share things more regularly now. And very much I keep the KLS synagogue Twitter and Facebook and Instagram accounts entirely positive and uncontroversial. So my kind of mantra is things that make us think, smile or giggle. And we do not go anywhere near anything sort of controversial or political or anything like that. And I think that's something that's certainly endorsed by the council and the community, because I just don't think it's the place for KLS as a community to get too involved with the more controversial side of Twitter. Now, I do have a personal Twitter account. I don't have a following as such as Gabriel anywhere near, but just through being a kind of Jewish person with opinions on Twitter, it's very difficult not to get kind of sucked into some of the more negative side of things. And I have seen the very dark side of Twitter when it comes to anti-Semitism and abuse and stuff like that, purely on my personal account. But I've shut down my mentions, I block a lot of people. I don't get too involved because frankly, life's too short. And I think in very few cases you can actually, Gabriel might disagree with this, but I think in few cases you can change people's minds on social media. I think people tend to go there with entrenched opinions, and they just want to kind of express those opinions and shout down people who don't agree with them. And I've got myself dragged into that before, but I try to stick clear of it as much as I can. But that's very much my personal hat. As I said, I think with my KLS hat on, Twitter has not I say Twitter just because that's where we're most active, but social media has only been positive. We've gained more members, we've gained more followers, we've gained lots of kind of informal contacts right across the spectrum, from medieval manuscripts to individuals who are searching for a Jewish background, just all sorts of things that I share sunrises every morning from a guy who lives up in Northumberland and posts a beautiful photo of a sunrise every morning, and it's just lovely.
You must be seeing those anyway in Kingston now with the smog on and no aeroplanes.
It's quite pretty around here, I have to say. But he's got the sea. We don't have the sea in Kingston.
We don't have the sea.
We don't have.
Igor, LJS, a very long-established synagogue. How has social media come into the world of LJS?
The LJS is, I mean, you are right that the LJS is has a long history of relationship with liberal Judaism and the liberal Jews around the world, and I was very surprised and, in fact, delighted to know that so many of our members now live abroad and live both or nationally. The geographical spread of the community is extremely wide, and this is why the social media and what is happening now with all the services being live streamed and accessible online for everybody, it allows people who don't live near the synagogue to take an equal part in our services. And this is something which has been fascinating to see. I mean, we have people from Finland, from Germany, from States, from across the UK joining our services because that's their synagogue and they miss it. And the same happens with, by the way, people with special needs who wouldn't normally come to a synagogue because it's difficult, and also the difficulty of being central London synagogue is about using public transport in general and long commute and giving an opportunity for people to feel online presence. I don't think it's as good as being inside the building, and I don't think anyone thinks that. But it is certainly better than nothing. I don't think it will be questioned by anyone. But it has lots of positive sides, and I would like to think that positive sides overweight negative sides, which also exist.
I think you're absolutely right there, and I think the word you're looking, particularly with LJS, as you were saying, it is tradition. That's the one that comes out. But I think you said about the sides of is moving the synagogue or moving the services online, and it has been very interesting to watch how fast some synagogues have moved. I know that we're sitting here in a liberal environment, and so we have the opportunity to. It was very interesting. I don't know, as you may have seen, the conservative movement in America announced that their synagogues, as of this weekend, I assume it is as of this Shabbat, can start streaming. So, do any of you see us going back?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, some of the boundaries that we've broken down, will we be sitting there going, well, we're not going to put services on, or we're not going to do that, or we're going to adapt to it? Are we, even when all of this is passed in a number of years' time, do you see us retracting away from where where we've gone to?
Do you mean, are we going to continue to live stream our services even when we're back in shul?
Yeah,
and
not just that, but
live stream activities and
live stream activities. Look at opportunities. Is this the way that you're collaborating? And arguably, I mean, a question, and maybe this one's to Rebecca particularly. Do you see membership of Kingston Liberal opening its doors to anybody from here to,
Australia?
Australia.
Yeah. We've actually got a few members, a few people who regularly visit us from Australia on our live stream services now. And, we're chatting to them in the comments and, just like they were, not just like they were with us, but, they're names that we now recognise. And we've certainly decided as a council that we are going to continue live streaming services even when we're back in the shul, because we do have a wider reach, partly people who are geographically far away, but also members who for whatever mobility reasons cannot always get to the shul on a Friday or a Saturday, and alongside the streaming that we have set up over the last 2 months, we've got a tech team that's helping a lot of our members get online, the people who are not quite so confident about using technology. We've got lots and lots of people now using technology who weren't before because we've helped them to do so. And so clearly, they then have the option, if they're not feeling well enough to travel to shul on a Saturday morning, they can go online as well. And yeah, we are definitely thinking about, our thoughts are quite embryonic, but we are thinking about some kind of sort of virtual membership of the synagogue where people who might be in Australia and clearly not going to be able to come to us have some kind of membership where they can also access our services and our classes and our social events. So that's definitely something we'd be considering. But I think we'll be live streaming, for now.
And Gabriel, I know that you being based where you are up in York and with Manchester as well, and the areas there, you already were reaching out into people, but do you find that there's no barrier as well?
So I've happened to have had 3 different sorts of experience of live streaming. So the last real life service I was at in a synagogue was actually in Northwood and Pinner, which was the week before lockdown came in. And that was being live streamed in the way that Northwood and Pinner has live streamed its services for a very long time. That was my first time being live streamed, but for me, it just felt like a normal service. I did my normal stuff. There happened to be a camera recording it. And then the next service I took was one for Kingston at KLS, which was on Facebook Live. And that was a very strange experience because I couldn't see any of the congregants. It was literally just me talking to a screen, and I was being broadcast to people, and they couldn't see each other. They could just see me on their screen, poor devils. And then finally, I came to begin doing Zoom services, and that's a third different experience where you see everyone plastered all over the screen. And that's by far my favorite of the online options where there's that interactivity and everyone's on an equal footing.
Okay.
And I do worry that when we go back into our synagogues physically there, those who are joining in virtually, it will be a very different experience because there will be that 2-tier and they won't be on an equal footing to the people who are physically present. There'll be a different, there's 2 types of ticket going on. And I think making that work and making that transition, keeping the good of what we've got will be difficult.
So for my own perspective, and this is one that I have a number of views on, I always remember going back it was quite a while ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who was in hospital at the time. He's Christian and he couldn't follow his church on a Sunday. And he sat there in the hospital and I was like, all of these people, the one thing they actually want is the connection with their religious institution. And you don't get it. And it was, to me, that was like the bit where I went, well, you can, and why shouldn't we? Coming to the point that you've just mentioned there, Gabriel, and as you know, I'm involved in the stuff at MPLS. We're actually sitting there going, well, how are we going to bring that back in? Will we, we're looking at where we will put in screens so that the rabbis, at the moment, the rabbis can see the Zoom. We're looking at maybe we're putting screens so that even when services come back in a transitional or a permanent thing, that we will be able to bring things in. And as you mentioned, you came to Preach, which is really nice, and I happened to listen. I do listen to most, so it wasn't just a priority, but I did actually listen to that. But it was exactly the ability to bring in somebody like yourself with a different view and opinion into the room, which sometimes that barrier of distancing caused the issues. I mean, Igor, you're, as you said, I've watched what you're doing there at LJS, and it's just really interesting how you're expanding and changing things, and it's like each week is another step on an evolution.
Yes.
How do you find that?
I find that this challenge of having to deal with online services is difficult, but it also creates room for creativity, which means that, I have two phrases, two Jewish phrases from our texts. The one is a quite well-known phrase from Rabbi Hillel, do not separate yourself from the community. And wherever your community is, you have to be there as a rabbi, as a synagogue, as a Jewish community. And I think now all the people are online, and we need to be there for them and to serve our community. And even before the lockdown, there were more people using internet on a daily basis than people reading prayers on a daily basis. And I don't think we should have any doubts about that. And the second approach is that, in a way, our tradition, it is not new for our tradition to deal with very complicated crisis in Judaism. The Judaism we know now came out from the destruction of the temple, and the temple Judaism ceased and stopped being relevant because the reality changed. And in a way, it allowed those people who were in opposition to the temple Judaism, which some people call Pharisees, to establish their view. And in a way, we are now experiencing another leap in history.
Yeah.
And this leap is about adjusting to the new reality. And I don't think, answering your question, I don't think we are going to go back in the way that we did before. I think that we are going to go back to our building, but the reality will be different, and we need to adjust to the new reality, and perhaps to be ready for what I call hybrid or mixed participation.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yes.
And I think one thing I really need to say to both you and Gabriel is every rabbi I've spoken to has said it's probably the hardest thing that they've had to do is to be, or not, in general, they've gone on to do a service that they could have done easily, and they're confronted with something that I don't think the Leo Becker's actually put on the program yet to teach you how to do it. But I haven't seen anything but absolutely excellent deliveries from liberal rabbis in this environment. It was very interesting to listen to this week's Unorthodox podcast, which I listened to, and some of others may do, and they're talking about the conservative side, and they were saying, we not very happy about this, that we're doing the streaming, and then they said, but we've been watching kids playing, and then the Shema comes on, they stop, say the Shema, and they say, if that is one improvement, the one connection, and I'll take that to Rebecca, sitting where you're sitting, and you talked about the distancing. Have you also found that there is closer communication with a lot of the people that you deal with generally? Have you found your community is growing through this?
Definitely. Yeah, undoubtedly. It's both growing and strengthening. We during the services, everyone's kind of chatting online. I mean, it's just like a real shul, everyone's talking and not necessarily listening to the rabbi. Sorry, Renee. But everyone's having a lovely chat online during the services. And we've got our own Facebook group, and everyone's posting photos of their gardens and their walks and their dogs and their cats, mainly their cats, and that's mainly me. There's just this real sense of, I personally, I live alone. Well, I live with two cats, but I live alone, and it's been 8-9 weeks of lockdown, and I feel closer to my community now, I think, probably, than I have over the last couple of years. I've only been a member for a couple of years, just because we're in touch, like, daily, virtually, but daily, either on Facebook or on WhatsApp, or just and it really has brought us closer together. And we've grown members. We've got 3 new members in the last month. And that has been as a direct result of people joining us for our online services and really liking what they're seeing. and have now actually joined the community. Now, possibly they would have joined anyway. I don't know, because they, possibly they were interested in joining us anyway. But, we are definitely growing. But I do definitely think there's a much, much stronger feeling community.
Apart from having the joys of having to see Gabriel's ironing board, which we have seen on a number of things.
Yeah, that was a particular highlight. Yeah.
Yes, and other various views of Gabriel's house, which normally when the charade is moved. What are the other things that you've seen outside? You've talked about how your synagogue has grown, and then you've talked about the things that are happening around it, the community aspect. See, I find this quite interesting because I think that there is a lot happening in the religious element of it, but it's also that the community element.
Oh, totally.
And some things have worked, and I've seen some things that have not worked. Unfortunately, we've all sat there and watched some shivers that it's very hard work, and it's difficult to deliver certain things like funerals, and I really appreciate those that have had to go out and do that. It's very hard. Gabriel, what have you seen that's piqued you that's not just the religious side online?
So I think a huge part of what I've seen going on has actually been almost community organising and communities working together to get things happening that would need to happen. And a huge amount of that has been happening over social media, from trying to get people's old, there's a terrible motorbike outside, trying to get people's old laptops and bits of technology together to lend to older members of the community who might not have things. There have been countless Facebook posts of, I've got 5 extra boxes of matzah, does anyone want any? There's been so much going on that's been people building connections in a way that they might not have thought of doing previously, even though the need was there. Maybe it was a bit less, but it was there as well. And I think that's been really powerful to see. And just overall, it's been amazing for me to watch attendance shoot up at things. Like, the services and the events that I've been at since lockdown began have been by far the best attended things that I've done. And I think that's partly because people have got less to do, but it's also partly because the ease is there, and because it's something that they get a feeling of human connection from. Seeing the Tesco delivery guy once a fortnight doesn't do it in quite the same way as tuning into a service, even if you're not religious, even if you don't believe in God, whatever it might be. Just that sense of seeing people that you recognise, the same people week after week, I think is important for people.
So Igor, coming back to your dissertation, if I got that right?
Yes.
On if you were rewriting it now, is it difficult to say how has the world changed that in your experience and what you knew when you wrote that to where we are now?
Well, it's a really good question. I just wanted to share one anecdote. And during the Seder Pesach, when it came to the end, to the song Chad Gadya, when it is about one goat, then came a cat, then came a dog, and so on and so on. So, and when we started to to sing the cat part, people, instead of, Zoom, we had it on Zoom, and Zoom doesn't allow you to sing together, but people went and grabbed their cats and showed it, and that was absolute highlight of my Pesach. I loved it, and it really triggered the rabbinic team thinking that actually we couldn't have done it in our building to invite all our members with their pets, because so many people have allergies, and
especially not cats.
Well, yes.
But you're seeing.
So what we did a special pets kiddush, and the creativity is, and so we invited all the pets to our services. And in a way, what I can see, and what I started, one of the ideas of my dissertation was that, in a way, having Judaism on social media allows people to bring Judaism to people's homes, rather than having Judaism. Having synagogue as a place for Judaism, and my home is something separate, has nothing to do with my tradition.
You've absolutely nailed something I was thinking there.
Totally.
And
totally nailed it.
And perhaps the thinking started. It's just an MA dissertation, it's not a PhD. So I think that it can easily now grow to a PhD, and I would be happy to develop it, but probably not now, I think.
I think if I think from myself, 6 months ago, nobody knew what the inside of my house looks like. Well, you probably still don't, because all you're seeing is the inside of one room. We didn't invite people in, and we ended up with 3 separate lives. We had our home life, our work life, and our Jewish life, depending on where you were. And now all of a sudden, those 3, I personally think that there is only one day of the week now. It's Thursday. I think everything is a Thursday. You can't work out anything, but it's a Thursday. But as you say, you're bringing these things together. But I'm fascinated. I want to just ask on the not necessarily on the technical, but particularly to Rebecca. You talked earlier about that you pushed out on Twitter a lot at KLS. Was there, and how have you found? Is there been a particular reason why you chose that, or you just and how have you found other areas?
Do you mean other areas of social media?
Other areas of social media, and yes, your cats can go on TikTok if you can get them to dance to the right song.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I might have to go and do that right now. Twitter, as I said earlier, I was on Twitter personally anyway. So I kind of knew a lot about, I'd spent probably too much time in the Twitter world. So when I joined KLS, I just thought that they could be doing more on Twitter. And I just sort of offered up my services, and that was accepted, gratefully. And I just spent, a lot of time just tweeting. Just a lot of it was silly stuff. A lot of it was sharing interesting stuff. Like I say, stuff that kind of makes us, think, giggle, or smile, giggle, or think. I can never remember which order I put it in.
There's another word normally in there, but we won't use that, even though it is after 9 o'clock.
After the watershed.
Yeah, I've gone beer down.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering if we were that. Yeah,
I've seen as you go off camera, we saw Rebecca
exactly. I was waiting for that. So Twitter, and the thing is with Twitter, I think it's just kind of just in terms of volume. You can just really push stuff out there in terms of volume. But Facebook and Instagram I also use to a lesser extent as well. But Twitter, I think, has been the thing where we've really kind of grown the follower numbers, and it's just much more kind of direct and immediate. I think you can have conversations and you can attract people, and
So talking about Twitter, and you can't really have a conversation in this room about Twitter without turning to Gabriel.
No, this is very true. Gabriel
has been involved in and has both been involved and watched a number of the storms that happened in the last couple of years in the Jewish environment. Do you think they have been a benefit to the Jewish community, or do you think the lights that have been shone on us have been a good thing or a bad thing?
So I'm really reminded of a story about a dispute between Hillel and Shammai about whether humankind should have been created. And one of them said, no, we shouldn't have been created. And one said we should. And in the end, they decided, well, it would be better if we hadn't been created. But now we have. Let's make the best of it. And I think that's very much how I feel about some of the more ferocious side of Twitter as well, which is maybe the world would be a better place if people didn't have a space to unleash parts of themselves they might not be so proud of. But that exists, and it's not a space that we as Jews and as Jewish leaders can just opt out of. And in particular, I'm thinking about public visibility and almost more about people who aren't Jewish looking in. So there are a lot of Jewish spaces online. I'm thinking particularly of the social media pages of the Jewish newspapers, where the content you see there is sometimes quite horrendous, particularly Islamophobia and various sexism, like various forms of really quite nasty hatred. And I think it's important for the people looking at those pages to see inappropriate content being challenged by Jewish leaders. Otherwise, they'll think we just sit on our hands and we're fine with it and we acquiesce. And so this is maybe one of the examples of what I mean, it being more about the audience than about the one-to-one communication. I don't think I'm going to change the mind of anyone who hates Muslims. I do think I'm going to create, hopefully, as part of everyone else who's decent out there, a safer place online for people who are going to feel intimidated by that sort of content and who want to feel that the Jewish community is standing up.
While we're having this conversation, and obviously we're in a room of just the four of us, it's just the four of us. We are having a number of questions that come in from outside, and Izzy has been throwing questions, which I'm going to ask her to put one of the questions up that she thinks is the relevant ones, as things are coming through. And I think it's, as we think about that, and she's got some of them coming. Igor, KLS, Twitter, Gabriel, as we know where Gabriel's gone, from the situation where we were with MPLS, we went very heavy Facebook, and have gone also a lot with YouTube. Just tell us where you are in the journey on the social media paths at LJS.
At the LJS.
At the LJS,
because they're two separate things.
Yeah, I know, sorry.
My personal account and the LJS. So one of the conclusions of my thesis is that I realized that it's not my phrase, but medium is a message. So the way how you approach things, the process is no less important than the content. And what is important, I think, on social media is that you need to ensure a representation of the community in the team which manages social media. Because if you start, in a way, everybody is biased. Because I can't think. I'm sure that I have lots of things which I don't think about, and I'm biased about, consciously or unconsciously. And therefore, having a team which manages the social media platforms of your synagogue, I think is crucial. And this team should be as diverse as possible. And there are lots of examples when I would say limited number of people, I would say like a elite of a synagogue or of any organization, it's not only about synagogue, it's taking control over social media, and they think that they represent the community or an organization, but there are always people who feel alienated. So to have a clear and transparent process of decision making, to have a clear process of complaints if something happens, and of dealing with these complaints is crucial for large organizations.
I think you're right. I think there's two things that come out of what you've just said there, Igor. First of all, in my view, is you're going to make mistakes. Social media is, by the nature of the fact that you're communicating with people, if you write a line in social media, success can be driven either by people who hate it, people who like it. So I absolutely agree. That's a very good and valid point there. And the second thing is that you've said is about using different people to be able to bring in different voices and different expectations. I always feel with myself, I've been involved in various different things at synagogues. I used to run the youth club. I think it's a pride of as a badge of honor that most of the people I know that ran the youth club at one point or another, we all got sacked, and that includes quite a few rabbis. But the reason is that you get sacked because your views and your opinions and your drive of this. I used to have a boss that said to me once, he said, when you come into a job, don't make too many changes because you won't understand the environment. Then you should make a load of changes because eventually you will be the problem. And I actually think with social media is an example of something that is always moving. So we're in the wave at the moment and we may know various different things. But as Rebecca started talking about, if we were sitting and having this conversation in 5 years' time, it will all be about TikTok. It probably won't even be about TikTok anymore.
That's something else.
Something else. It'll be something else that has changed. And it's been fascinating in my experience of how fast they've moved. I think that leads us on to one of the questions that's been put up. And how do we solve this problem? And I'm going to ask Gabriel on this one first.
this is one of the most difficult things that we've encountered, and particularly because it happened so suddenly. I think if we'd been given 3 months' notice of lockdown, we would have been able to solve it so much more creatively. I think the best option that people have come up with is about collecting the old technology that we all have cluttering up our households in various ways and trying to distribute it. And part of that is also about sharing best practice. So I wanted to give an elderly congregant in a community I work with instructions on how to set up Zoom. And I knew that I didn't have to sit and write them from scratch because I knew someone else would have done it. And there are Facebook groups for liberal Jewish people running things during this time, clergy running things during this time. And that sharing was a way to get around it. But ultimately, there are still going to be people who are excluded. And certainly, I would hope that liberal Judaism and other organizations that have some level of social care role would begin thinking much more broadly about how we're going to deal with this. If, for example, people were going to be shielded for another year, I think we might be wanting to ask the government to look at provision of technology for those who are going to be really cut off by it otherwise. I think that's a really broad issue for society as a whole, and people who are part of a Jewish community that will take steps to look after them are very fortunate to have that network, but I don't think it's just a Jewish issue at all.
So, I mean, there's a very interesting one on that. Tomorrow we've got somebody on from Mosaic, and Mosaic have come up with a solution where they are providing to certain congregation members a Android style device along with a 4G modem so that they can follow the service from home. They're going to give it completely fully packed and ready and shipped out, and I think they're covering the costs, etc., for certain members. And I'm looking here that Owen from Manchester is saying that they're offering basic online training sessions, which is exactly what we need. Are you, Rebecca, how does that then translate? Because there's the question then comes about how your membership will transaction, how will things change for you in terms of your membership, and how you're, that's a really interesting point of this.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you sort of take a step back and think about, the sort of members that we have been attracting over the last, I guess, 5 years or so have been, I guess, more likely to be more tech savvy, just because of the demographic that they've come from. But, as Gabriel was saying, it was almost the first thought we had when we realized that lockdown was coming, and when we realized that we were going to have to go online. I think collectively our first thought was, what about our members who can't get online or who are not comfortable getting online? And that really was where the effort was taken early on, and we wrote Facebook guides and Zoom guides. And even now, we've got some members who don't have their own computer, but they will dial in to another member. I literally just phone them up and then listen to the live stream service from, over the phone. It's not ideal, but they're still connected. And those members who are on the phone have said, oh, Joyce is with us tonight, and everyone, oh, hi, Joyce, everyone's talking to Joyce online, and that's being passed back. And Joyce actually then joined one of our Zoom Shabbat services to talk about her experiences on VE Day, so she was able to dial into the Zoom call, even though she doesn't have internet access or anything like that. And of course, that was absolutely wonderful because we all heard her, her speaking. So it was absolutely our priority at the beginning. But just in terms of maintaining that, then yes, absolutely, and obviously when lockdown is alleviated to some extent, we will actually be able to go and visit people's houses as long as we're safe and take all the right precautions, and actually sit next to them and help them get online, which will be much better than trying to explain it over the phone. So we'll be able to take that to a new level.
So I'm going to ask Igor, have you seen a risk that we're actually pushing people away because of our approach to this?
Well, some people certainly feel alienated because of the technology, and the stress from the lockdown is just exaggerated by the stress of dealing with technology. Especially in this case, this is a generational issue. So those who are not or less used to live their lives online, they are at a slightly higher risk of being more stressed now because of the technology. But one of the articles I read in the beginning of the lockdown was the title was something like, if you do your services online or your classes online, please do a bad job, because you have to if you do too if you create too nice environment online, some people will actually prefer it. So maybe there is a and I don't think anyone thinks that online fully replaces the in-person experience. However, I think that when it comes to a choice between better quality and accessibility, accessibility should win. One example of it is that I had a choice. Not me personally, but the LGS team had a choice whether to run our services on platforms like we're using now, which is especially tailor-made for live streaming, or to run it on Zoom. And Zoom is less aesthetically pleasing, and it doesn't look as professional as this one. So we made a choice to use Zoom because there's a number of people who dial in to our service and use their landline phone to listen to our services and to our sermons and talks and all educational programs. This is why, for example, platforms like Zoom, I believe that should be prioritized, or at least people who don't have internet or a computer should be given an opportunity, or if we can. However, I just wanted to pick up on the issue. Those people who have difficulty or online are sometimes, not often, I'm not saying that statistically, it's sometimes those people who wouldn't come to services. So in a way now, they are given an opportunity to be present in the service in the same way as the rest of the community. So in a way, this is very liberating, and this is an opportunity for those people to be part of the service rather than to
so asking that to Gabriel, I mean, my view and opinion of how things are in some of this is that we used to prioritize. I mean, if you go really far back, you prioritize synagogues based upon the fact that your grandparents bought the seats at the front row, and that was and you bought those and they were passed down, and that's how close you could get depending on where you are. We are now prioritizing people that aren't in the room, and if anything, we've completely reversed the fact that those people who we were in a way ignoring because they couldn't make it to the service, we're now bringing the service to them and everybody else. Gabriel, you're out in the far reaches where your cobbles are still up there, aren't they? If I remember rightly. How is this environment going to? Is it helping you there because you can reach out to people that you weren't reaching before, and will it continue?
So, in some ways, it's definitely helpful, and the ability for me to lead a service in Glasgow, which I did recently from the comfort of Golders Green, is a real positive, both in terms of the energy that I have in order to do it, not completely travel-worn, and also in terms of balancing private life as well. I can have dinner with my wife, notwithstanding that I'm in Glasgow. But I think there are also problems as well. I think there's a risk possibly of disincentivizing attendance as well. I would be really sad, for example, if bar and bat mitzvah students felt like this was a permanent solution to be Zooming in rather than to be coming to physical services when we resume. And I also miss Torah scrolls. And so there are some things that just are not replicable in an online sense. On the other hand, as you say, it's letting us reach communities in places that we wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. It's meaning that people get to hear a wider variety of voices. It means that when a rabbi on the other side of the country is ill, their community can just ring round any other rabbi or rabbinic student and get them to fill in at a moment's notice because there's no geographical issues. There's this real mix of pros and cons. It's a really interesting situation we find.
I would agree. I have regularly in the mornings tuned in to listen to Mo over in Bristol. She does her morning services, and it's just great. It's just a completely different thing that it's not something that I've grown up with. It's not something that I had experienced in a great deal. And you're seeing these things and taking these ideas and concepts. And I think because there's probably, for me, very little barrier to actually turning up and trying it. And it gives us the ability to see it. And it's wonderful. And it's great. So we've seen the positives. We've seen these areas. And I do feel we're shifting. I don't know if your own view is. We seem to, with the current situation, we're more moving towards what are the positives we're getting out of this rather than just sitting here being on the negative sides of this. Igor, can't avoid the problem. High Holy Days are not far away. This must be playing on your mind as to how to deliver what is, for some people, their main connection with their synagogue.
Yes. In a way, even if we will be in a situation then when we will be allowed to open our synagogues, it doesn't mean that some people will come, because as we know, if you can, it doesn't mean you should. And I'm sure that some people won't feel comfortable going into a building with lots of other people in. And therefore, I think it's important for all synagogues and all religious institutions now to think about the future and to allow people and to make sure that people who would prefer to attend online would have this opportunity. And in a way, I think that if we would create a not good enough live streaming for those who would prefer to attend online, we would be pushing people. We would be putting people in the position of choosing to go to the synagogue because services are not online services are not good enough, and that's why I think that we should be prepared to create as good as possible, to be prepared as good as possible to the mixed participation. Some people would be watching online, some people would be in the synagogue, and this is, I think, that we should be prepared for. Although, who knows? Things change so fast now. Maybe there will be a second wave by then, and we won't be able to do at all services. So I think that now, and liberal rabbis already started to think about it, and there are a number of working groups working on technology, collaboration, on liturgy, because liturgy also should change. When we read some prayers, when we say, we gathered here in this synagogue, are we in a synagogue? We are in an online spiritual space, which is certainly reflected some of the synagogue's features, but it's not a fully synagogue. And that's, I think that liturgy should also slightly change as well. We are living in a very interesting time.
So, Rebecca, taking that same point to Kingston, you know, High Holy Days. I don't know how. What's the normal situation for Holy Days? Do you do it at your synagogue, or is it separate? Is it at your?
It's at our building. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it's usually, obviously, the most sort of well-attended services of the year, as you'd imagine, and very, you know, very organised, very, very well managed. You know, planning starts about now, if not slightly earlier. You know, with all of the kind of, you know, the aliyahs and the readings, and, you know, everything's in place. And obviously, we're very much, you know, we've been talking about it at our council already in terms of, I think our working assumption is that, yes, people will be able to go to the synagogue. We're hoping that things will have opened up, but obviously there will be some people who can't, because they're still going to have to be sheltering or self-isolating, or they just don't want to take the risk. So we're very much thinking of some kind of hybrid, you know, where there are going to be some people in the shul, but a lot of the stuff is going to be online. And, you know, to the point that Igor was making, we have to make it as valuable an experience and as important, you know, an experience for those people who can't be there in person. They can't feel like second-class citizens, you know, that they're just watching from the back but excluded because they're not there. Now, there's a huge amount of work we've got to do, obviously, in order to do that. I mean, I would just say, you know, I would take the slightly more optimistic view than Igor. Igor's talking about a second wave, we might still be in lockdown. My view would be, actually, it might have all disappeared by then and we can be back to complete normal by September. No,
I don't know. I'm
we're
not
not
sure.
assuming that. We're not assuming that that's going to be the case. We're assuming it's going to be a hybrid model. But, you know,
I like
God
being
says we
able
don't know.
I like being able to get up, put on my slippers, and not have to get on the tube every morning.
That will actually be a fulfillment of Yom Kippur tradition, not wear shoes.
That's
So
it.
maybe this will be a nice thing.
It will be. It'll be fascinating to see how, because as you say, this is a major. Absolutely, of course, it's a major component of the Jewish yearly cycle, and it will be something that's got to be completely different.
I think it's going to distill everything we've been talking about tonight in terms of how do you make it inclusive, accessible, not make some people feel excluded, not make some people feel like second-class citizens.
Yeah.
And it's going to be distilled into one day, and it's going to be a huge issue for all of us, I think, in terms of how we manage that.
And I can tell you from a technical perspective, putting on a service that lasts an hour and a half is a lot of work. Putting on a technical broadcast that's going to last for Yom Kippur the whole day is really going to be pushing everybody to areas that they've just not gone to before. For you, Gabriel, is Yom Kippur, this could be your biggest attendance that for you to preach in front of?
Yes, well, I mean, I think it's very likely to be in part. So the Manchester and York Liberal communities have already agreed that Manchester will join York, whether virtually or in person, whatever the individuals involved will feel comfortable with, because it's going to be hybrid. We thought, why not get people engaged in some form or another? And I think it's really important that people are able to have that experience of seeing familiar faces, whatever it might be. Even though it will be an expanded group, they'll still be able to recognize the groups within that they're familiar with. I'm also just very conscious that, like Igor said, with the Pharisees breaking new ground, we are breaking new Jewish ground with this situation. There was a social media meme going around earlier this week which said that if coronavirus had happened during the time of the ancient Israelites, we'd all have a festival these days where we had to stay indoors for a month every year. And I think there is something in that. This is going to be the Pesach, the Shavuot, the High Holy Days that we're going to tell the grandchildren about having been there at the time. And it's not necessarily something to thrill over because it's obviously horrendous and sad in its own ways as well. But we're breaking new ground and we're experimenting, and it's going to be a very different Jewish world on the other side. And it's not just the four of us, but the four of us, among others, who are creating it.
I think that's a very good point to come to. I think we've covered many things. We've, I think, for what's quite surprising, for Jews in the room have agreed with each other. So
No, we haven't.
Yeah, there's very few times that normally happens. It's particularly with Gabriel.
We've done something wrong then, clearly.
We've done something wrong, so we broke the plan.
Sorry, guys.
Do you know a nice joke which says that two people are arguing with each other and came to a rabbi to sort their argument. And rabbi listens to the one and says, "Oh yeah, you're right." Then listens to the other one and says, "Yes, you are right." And the third person who overheard the conversation says, "But they can't both be right." "Oh, you are right." So I think in a way, all of us are right, and even those who think that they don't
left.
really make sense.
So before we finish up, just a quick go round. If you looked at this, if we're looking back at this in 5 years' time, do you think, from your view, do you think we're going to see this as a positive or a negative? I'll start with Rebecca.
Gosh. Are we talking about the impact it's had on our communities?
Yeah.
Positive, undoubtedly. I mean, if we're talking about coronavirus more generally across the world, then my answer would be very different, but we haven't right now. So for our communities, I think positive, definitely.
Igor?
I say two things. One is people plan, God loves. And the second
Yes.
one is...
I've actually got that on my coaster just there. Just there you go.
Man plans, God
and
laughs.
Yes, and the second one, yes, I made it a bit more egalitarian.
Yeah. Yes, you did. You did.
Man.
You did. You're right. I should slap myself and tell off the.
Well, no, I bought the one with man on it, so.
Okay.
And the second one is the teaching which one of my rabbis used to say is that as a rabbi, I am commanded to hope. So I do have a hope for a better future always.
Gabriel?
I think
I can't believe I'm giving Gabriel the last word. He's never had the last word in any discussion.
Try as I might. I think I'm going to dodge the question in an unhelpful way. Are we going to see it as a positive or a negative? No. I think we're just going to see it as one of those stages in the history of the community. There have been challenges thrown at Jewish people in every generation, every year, certainly every 10 years or so, something major happens. We've reacted to it. We'll look a bit different on the other side. There'll be good things about that. There'll be bad things about that. This is what it is to be alive. Strange things happen, and we happen to be in a twist and turn stage at the moment.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that...
That's a good last word. Stop there.
So
Go on, Leo, get the last word in.
No. I'm passing the last words to the comments that have been fed to myself that we've been told. Tom will be sending you an email in the morning, particularly covering as many billion Zoom links as he can. The program starts at 9 a.m. with a communal prayer and a collaborative experience for liberal Jews. Question mark. That's an interesting place to put a question mark. So that will be that is the first session tomorrow morning. I'm going to pass back to somebody who I think I'm looking forward to something that I've seen a sneak of tomorrow. But I'm going to pass you back to a rabbi that I know has put a lot of work in to the online programming area to finish us off for this evening.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to say thank you to everybody who watched to stayed until 10:15, and engaged with something Jewish. And thank you so much for everybody. And thank you to my colleagues, to Rebecca, Leo, Gabriel, for such an interesting and important conversation. And I think that we should... Gabriel mentioned the discussions and disagreements between Hillel and Shammai, and at some point they had a disagreement, and the rabbis came to a conclusion that the disagreement should be for the sake of heaven, so machloket l'shem shamayim. And we can disagree with each other, we can make mistakes, but these mistakes and these disagreements should be for the sake of heaven, and should be for a higher cause rather than just for pleasing our ego. And I think that this is something which I felt was certainly part of this conversation, and for this collaboratory, for this LJ Biennial in general. And thank you so much.